So just to say hi, it's really nice to be able to meet with you all again. I hope you've all been able to access the resources so far. It's taken a little bit of time to create a video, but I have now managed. So I've created a video from Monday's lecture because I know a few people had trouble with sound and accessing it. So what I will do is I'm going to upload that onto YouTube over the next, hopefully before I go home this evening, and I will send out the link so you've all got access to that. Obviously, if you have been able to watch the video already, or the lecture, sorry, already, then that's great. But equally, I will make it available to everyone else, just so if you want to keep it for record, or just as a reference point, really. So what we're going to spend a little bit of time this afternoon looking at is writing styles, and basically this is in preparation for your first assignment. Now, I appreciate that you haven't yet enrolled with us, and it probably feels quite mean, really, to launch your assignment. But the reason why we do it so early is to give you the opportunity to practice basically academic writing. So it is marked, but it's not necessarily it's not a summative grade, meaning that it's not going to go towards your grade at the end of the year. It's there to give you the opportunity to have a go, particularly for some of you who have been out of education for a while, or maybe you have done a slightly different route in education. And the idea is that you can have the opportunity to practice, to write us an essay, to get feedback. And actually that's the main focus for us, is that you have the opportunity to have feedback. So what I'll do is I'm going to launch it on Monday with you, and it just gives you the opportunity to be able to go through the assignment, and also just to then, as I have a go, we'll give you feedback. And then one of the things that's different for this particular assignment is you then get feedback. Sorry, you get the chance to resubmit the assignment and get further feedback. So whilst I appreciate on Monday I said we don't do resubmissions, for this particular assignment, what we like to do is give you the chance to resubmit it. We then remark it, and it allows you to see how your grade has improved following on from that initial marking system. So we will be doing an essay for this assignment, and as I say, I will launch it formally on Monday. In terms of Monday's lectures, you've actually got Sarah, I believe, for teaching on Monday. So what I will do is I will pop on slightly later in the day to give you the opportunity to ask any questions. But again, I will do it as a PowerPoint, so you've got the assignment clear and it's ready and it's available for anyone who can't access live. So with that in mind, then let's have a look at the lesson. So the key thing when it comes to this particular session is we're going to think about what's required for an essay, what's required for a report, and actually when it's best to use each. So during the course of your first year, you will have obviously assignments for each of your modules, and in some of those situations you will be asked to write a report, and in other situations you'll be asked to write an essay. And actually the ability to demonstrate both of those is a really, really valuable academic skills, but the structure is ever so slightly different. So we're going to talk a little bit about academic writing style as a general concept, and I'm going to pop some resources up for you later that go through kind of definitions and a little bit more about the expectations of assignments. But one of the things that's really key in all of that is also the format and the structure you present your work in. So again, I know for some of you it's been a little while since you've been in education. Maybe it's that you haven't had to do academic writing for a number of years. Some of you might be absolutely fine, and actually you've been doing it for a number of years. So hopefully by the end of this lesson, we'll all be on a fairly equal playing field when it comes to structure. So what I'd like you to do first of all is to think about if you were asked to write an essay, and we'll do this together, but if I was asking you to write an essay, what would be the key things that you feel you would need in that structure? So for example, would it be that you would you'd include an introduction, or how would you approach it? So just using the public chat, just pop some ideas down. So what things you specifically think you need in an essay to allow it to be an appropriate structure. So I'll just turn my mic off for 1 second.
that everyone loves school. I would never.
Okay, good. Got some nice lists already. So let's just go through. So yeah, Anna says a conclusion. Yeah, really, really important. So we're going to give you a topic to discuss, but absolutely one of the primary things that we are looking for with any essay is that you have an introduction and a conclusion. Now those would obviously be separate sections, but the most important thing when we have an essay, which is very different from a report, is an essay is designed to be a consistent structure. So we at University Centre Sparshot don't expect there to be any subheadings or any subtitles. So you would have your main, obviously have your main title, but you would then, instead of writing introduction, you would provide an introduction, but you don't need to provide a subheading for it. But there should be a clear introduction of the topic. Potentially you've provided some background to the context of the subject. It might be that you provide a really brief summary of what the essay is going to entail, but just be careful within that. One point to mention from the beginning is just be careful to avoid using the word I or the first person. So it might be that in the past, when you've written essays, you've written, in this essay, I am going to discuss X, Y, and Z. Now, that's great. That's really helpful to have that there. But at HE, we would generally advise against using the word I. So it might be instead that you write in the third person, and you could, one approach you could take would be to say, through the course of this essay, the author will discuss X, Y, and Z. Or you could say, through the course of this essay, X, Y, and Z will be discussed and will be evaluated, blah, blah, blah. So that's one of the things just to try and adopt very, very quickly, is to avoid using the first person, and as much as possible write quite objectively. So be quite clear, be quite concise in your approach. Equally, Anna said about writing a conclusion. Yep, definitely, that's really, really important as well. And again, it's making sure that in your conclusion you summarize what your main points are, but the trick is to not include any new information. So sometimes, I know when I was doing, so I did history, for example, at A-level, and you're always encouraged to have this really exciting, page turner kind of approach, and they all lived happily ever after, and this is amazing kind of conclusion. But with scientific writing, what we want you to do is summarize what your key findings already are, and hopefully you've already presented that in your essay. So really there should be no need to add anything new into it. So whereas in your introduction you're providing context and you're giving background information and you are introducing loads of new stuff and key terminology and everything else, in your conclusion you are literally summarizing what the main point is of your discussion, or the final points you want to emphasize, but none of that should be new. I hope that makes sense. So Amy said specific points. Yeah, so that's really good. That's another way to think about it, is to when you're planning your essay, one thing you can do that's quite helpful, and I certainly find this beneficial when I'm trying to plan an essay, is to almost do a bit of a mind map. So start with your key topic and think about what are the other topics that link to that, or another way to think about it is what are the layers of topics that you want to discuss. So yeah, there should be a clear plan through the course of your essay where one point leads to another, and try and be specific. So almost as if you did have sections, you're not going to, but almost like if you had sections with subheadings, how would you differentiate those from the one before? And again, that should come through in the essay. Cecilia said maybe a pro and con and a conclusion. Yeah, good. So that's another way. It's really important, particularly in scientific writing, is that you provide a balanced discussion. And sometimes that's hard because, we're all very passionate about what we're doing. And certainly there will be things that get you particularly fired up. Maybe there are some things that you are currently aware of that you deem unethical in terms of animal welfare. Maybe there are certain campaigns that you're aware of. It could just be that you have a favourite species and that's what you're passionate about. But often, unfortunately, what happens with passion is it can make us quite subjective, and it can make us very, very emotive. So try really, really hard, particularly in this essay, to try and be as neutral as possible. So absolutely showing both sides of the argument is going to allow you to do that. Now, it doesn't have to be equal. It's not like you have to, let's say you're like, right, 5 points for this and 5 points for that. But it's about saying, okay, how actually can I present a balanced argument? You know, can I pull out research that shows one side versus research that shows another, and also thinking about where that research is coming from as well, but we'll come back to that. So Rachel said links to resources. Yeah, good. So I'm assuming that you mean kind of resources for wider reading, or maybe you refer to references. But it's really important in your essays to make sure that you identify where you have got your information from. So Anna's comment about quotes and references, this is also going to show that. Again, at higher education, we don't particularly like putting information into essays unless we accredit the author to it. It's quite frowned upon, to be fair, if we're trying to suggest that what we've written is our own words and it's actually someone else's. So that's described as plagiarism, and we're going to cover that tomorrow. But yeah, absolutely, anytime you refer to research, and I would strongly encourage you to use research, to use references, to use journals. One of the things that we're going to go through tomorrow is also looking at the range of academic resources available to you. So we'll go through the library. I've got a nice induction video to show you, but you're going to have so much access. So lots of different scientific journals, lots of different books, lots of websites, and actually one of the things that you do need to practice, and I know as a lecturer I have to do the same, is to find looking at references that are credible. And one of the things that gives credibility to those references is if you provide the source that you've obtained it from. So that's a really, really good point. In terms of quotes, this is me being slightly controversial and being a little bit picky, but I personally don't particularly like direct quotes, just because it doesn't necessarily show your understanding. It shows that you can parrot, it shows that you can research, but it doesn't really show understanding. So with quotes, there's absolutely no problem in using the information, but I would always encourage you to try and paraphrase it, because what paraphrasing does is it shows, first of all, that you are able to articulate what sources have said. But what's more important is it shows that you have understanding of what you've read. So Anna's absolutely right. It's important to pull things out of sources, but always try and paraphrase them, because then it shows way more in understanding and a lot more interpretation of the sources, instead of simply just kind of pulling bits of information out, as controversial as that sounds. So Amy said about evidence. Yeah, evidence, again, using references, being able to discuss current research is really important, particularly in veterinary nursing, because obviously we are motivated by changes in veterinary practice, recommendations from our industry. If we've had a recent clinical trial, or there's any medication, or someone has done a specific study, all of those things are going to influence what we do. So research and evidence is really, really important. Good. Okay. So in terms of why we use essays, so I guess the main thing is that essays encourage you to be evaluative, and one of the skills that we are going to encourage you to develop throughout the course of your degree is being able to evaluate the information that you're presented with. And again, this might be a little bit different from what you're used to. I certainly know when I did my A-levels, it was very much kind of content based. So I don't know, let's say we had, what did I do? Like in my history, for example, I had to write an essay about the general strike, for example, in England. Very boring subject, but we had to write an essay on it. So at that point, you're just literally lifting facts, stating the facts, probably not really evaluating, just describing, discussing, identifying all those different terms. But higher education, what we like you to do is to be able to evaluate. So absolutely, as who said it? Kerry said, so discussion of the issue reviewed. So looking at all the different sides of the argument. Absolutely, Cecilia said, looking at pros and cons, being able to look at different references, seeing what different people say. is really, really beneficial. An essay also allows you to debate a topic, and one of the thing that we're going to give you for your, the assignment, not the thing, the assignment we're going to give you is going to encourage you to do that. It's going to be encouraging you to debate a specific topic. So again, there will not necessarily be a right or wrong answer, which again, for some of you might be a little bit out of your comfort zone. But what we want you to be able to do is to be able to look at different sources, to look at the different topics in that subject, and be able to debate them, basically. Really important, it encourages you to critically analyse, and we'll come back to this later on in the year, but basically all we're asking you to do is to, rather than just taking a source at face value, actually looking at the validity of what's been written. So, is it valuable? Is the research provided valid? Does it actually give you satisfactory conclusions? All those things. And then backing everything up with evidence. So definitely, as Amy said, for example, making sure that we link it all appropriately to evidence, and demonstrate where we have gained the information that's allowed us to come to that decision, basically. It's also really detailed. Essays generally are the one opportunity where you tend to write more lengthy, it's more concise. It might be that actually you find an essay you're more explorative in your writing style, which again is quite nice. Generally, we find that students quite enjoy essays for that reason, and equally it's really important after graduation. Now, I appreciate that for at the moment you're all hoping to become veterinary nurses, and yes, it's true, you're not be writing essays in practice, but the skills in terms of being able to analyse sources, being able to make clinical judgments, being able to collect information will be invaluable in practice. So again, it's really important skill. And equally, if you're thinking about doing a top-up maybe, or going into further education, maybe you're thinking about doing a master's, these are all skills that will come out time and time again, so it's really, really important. So in terms of why we write reports then, because obviously if we've just said, let's do an essay, and said how great essays are, and then we say, why would we do a report? So reports are ever so slightly different in the respect that where we said with an essay, you are keeping it to one particular flow of structure. You're not to use subheadings, you're not to use images, you're not to use figures, all those kind of things. With reports, they are much more designed to consolidate results or consolidate findings. So it is absolutely fine to use subheadings if you want to put pictures in, if you want to put tables in, if you want to have diagrams. Those are all absolutely fine in a report. Before I forget, with an essay, you can include those things, but they go as appendices. So when we go through the assignment, we'll talk about some things that you could consider as an appendice, so we'll come back to that. But with a report, the idea is that you structure it using headings and subheadings. As I say, you have different sections, and the idea is that it's very much a presentation of your findings. Again, you use evidence and you elaborate on your findings using those sources. And again, it builds up this critical analytical skill. So again, it's really, really helpful. But the lovely thing with reports is you are not restricted just to text. So again, if you want to produce figures and graphs or tables or images or whatever to summarize your points, then within a report, that is absolutely fine. So in terms of your essay then, because obviously this is one of the first things that's more important, because obviously you're going to have an essay to do. So as we already said, there needs to be an introduction, there needs to be a main body, and there needs to be a conclusion. So when you're planning your essay, it's always helpful to start off by kind of trying to make a physical plan. Now, in terms of how you write it, some people do this differently. So some people will write their introduction first, and it's almost like the first chapter of a book that actually if you don't do your introduction, you feel like you're a little bit lost, you don't really know where you're going. Other people will start with the main body. Very obviously, unsurprisingly, very few people will write the conclusion first. But the key thing is that there should be a clear link between all three. So your introduction, as we said, should provide context, should define any terminology, potentially might provide a scenario, maybe it tells you the current state of the topic that you're discussing, as well as we say, identifying what's going to be discussed in the essay. Your main body we're going to come onto in a minute, and as we said, the conclusion is more of a summary, emphasising what the significant points are that you've discussed. And as we said before, making sure that every statement you make is backed up with a reference. Now, this is something that is a little bit different from further education. I would imagine quite a lot of you have used referencing before, which is fantastic. It's a really good starting point. And those of you that have come through the access route, so that done our access to higher education, again, you would have happily done referencing before. But for some of you, you may have thrown a few references in, not quite as an afterthought, and please don't see that as criticism, but actually you were there to almost, your writing was there, and then you were using references every now and then just to complement what was written. So the key thing with referencing, particularly in scientific subjects, is anytime you make a statement that is not common knowledge, you need to have a reference. Now, common knowledge, when we go into anything animal related, is basically anybody who didn't have an interest in animal would know. So, for example, if I use the example of, let's say I'm writing an essay about a cat, and I use the scientific name of a cat, that would need a reference. If I state that a cat has 4 legs, probably not going to need a reference for that. But then if I go on and start describing the physiology of the cat's legs, those would need references. Maybe I've included a picture of a cat. Again, there needs to be a reference of where that's come from. So it's much more supportive than previously, to be honest. So we'll come on to this a bit more tomorrow when we talk about plagiarism. But again, it's really important that you do use your references. And as I say, we'll spend a little bit of time talking about that. The other thing is that you should be thinking about what arguments you want to put across. So again, your pros and cons, or different sides, different opinions, but make sure that they are rational and evaluative. So as we said before, the key thing here is that you are trying to be as objective as possible. And as I said, I appreciate that's quite difficult, particularly when we're talking about animals, because we're all passionate about animals. So one other thing to think about is the level of emotion within the sources that you've obtained. Now, I am fully aware that there are all sorts of different sources on the internet. Some of them are more of advocacy groups. Some of them are designed to cause an emotional response. Some of them are designed to cause shocking. So therefore, those are the kind of references that we do not want to see in your essay. So the ones that jump to my mind, again, this is not necessarily criticism of them, but please don't put PETA in, for example. PETA are very good as an advocacy group. They're very effective in what they do. But because of what they do, they are incredibly emotive. So just bear that in mind. If there is anything you're using that is highly emotive, you will be picked up on it. It won't necessarily affect your grade as an individual factor, but it's really important to get out of the habit before you start writing more academically, because in scientific writing there's really not a place for it, so just try not to do it. The other thing that's quite helpful when you're writing your essay is to try and find the literature first. Now, again, this might be something slightly different than you've done before. Maybe you've before been given a topic and you've known the subject really well, and as I say, then you've gone off and looked for references and you've kind of sandwiched them in where they fit. But try, if you can, to do all your research first, or at least most of your research, and then write your information from those sources. One of the things that I started doing in my master's, which I've just finished it, so whatever age, I've been in education a while, but one of the things that I found, which was really, really helpful, slightly out of my comfort zone to start with, but was to actually do your reference list as your first thing. So get all of your references, make sure you're happy with them, and then use those as a template to write your essay. One thing it does, which was great for me, is it stops you panicking at the end of your submission to make sure that you've got all the references present, because obviously you have, because you've written your essay from them. But what also I've personally found is it shaped my arguments. So if I knew I had my references ready, I could then dip in and change and do things in response to those references, rather than feeling like, oh, I've just made this point and now I need a reference that matches it. You're still going to do that. It's not that you're suddenly like writing down all the information, but again, if you've got a catalogue of references that you've already prepared, it often makes it easier to kind of frame and shape your work. So in terms of the main point, the main body then, so the idea is that you hopefully have made some points in your introduction. You may have introduced some themes or provided some context to the subject. So what your main body should do is then expand upon those points. So as Amy said about your specific points, again, it's worth thinking before you start writing, what are the main or the most important points relating to your topic that you have. And again, if you've looked at the research before, the literature before, you probably will find this guides it, because often the most important topics are the ones that have most references on them. So that's also quite helpful. And then what you want to do is try and develop these points with evidence, so that you can not only show that you are able to write about the topic, but that you can ground those in relevant research and also expand those ideas a bit further. So to give you an example, it might be that I have writing an essay about how many legs cats have, and my main point is that I'm going to say that cats have 4 legs. Now my starting point might be cats have 4 legs. They are generally ambulatory, so they can move around, and often cats will choose to be on high perches rather than on the ground. So I would then put a reference at the end of that statement, but then I may well say, for example, research presented by Smith in 2020 suggested the potential that for some cats, they actually have 5 legs and not 4. So the idea is that you're using your research, you're using your main points to expand as you go. I hope that makes sense. Please do ask questions if I'm not being clear, because as you can see, I will quite happily chat away by myself. But again, make sure that you make your point, provide the evidence, and then back it up. So it's not just a case of, and this is possibly the difference between university essays and other ones you've done before, is that you want to make your point, provide a research, back it up, explain it, make sure you explain it. One of the things that we often pick up students on is we will ask them to evaluate, or we might ask them to discuss, and actually students are excellent identifying, but maybe you're just not explaining yourself enough. One of the things that I often feel like I write a lot on, which I feel quite mean when I'm marking, but you know, often it's I put good but why, or good but how could this be explained, or good, can you provide examples of this? So in your essay, take the opportunity to chat through all the different themes and try and give as much variation, as much discussion around the topic as you can. So as we said, the key thing is that you are wanting your citations to be used effectively. So this basically means you've got to embed them, and you're kind of tucking your evidence into your sentence. So there's kind of 2 ways you can do this. You can either use a reference at the end of a sentence to complement what you said. So using my cat example, it might be that I say cats have 4 legs, and they are ambulatory, and like to be at height. I could then have a text citation at the end, so I could have that sentence and then a bracket and say Smith 2020. That could be one way of doing it. And again, I've embedded it within my sentence. But the other way I could do it is where I refer to the reference before I start my sentence. So I could say, according to research presented in 2020, cats are described to have 4 legs, are ambulatory, and like to be at height. So you've got a slightly different approach, but the key thing is that you are showing, because you're paraphrasing, you're showing that you understand what's written. And again, this is a skill that we will keep developing through this year. So don't feel, if you're saying, oh my goodness, like I don't know how she wants us to do this, please don't panic. See this essay as a starting trial, as an opportunity to practice, and I say you'll get full feedback, and we will go through this properly on Monday together. Key thing, copy and paste does not show comprehension. And as I say, tomorrow we're going to talk about plagiarism, which is basically copy and pasting. So if in doubt, please don't plagiarize. If in doubt, paraphrase, make sure you provide a citation. If you're not comfortable with if you don't feel that the easiest way to do this is if you read something and you can't understand, or you can't explain in your own words what that reference says, I would strongly advise that you don't use it, or you try and find something else, because if you're not able to articulate to somebody else or to yourself what it means, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to demonstrate understanding in your writing. So make sure that you are understanding, you are paraphrasing, you are explaining things in your own words, because that really does show comprehension at this stage. Okay, and then the ending. So make sure you make a conclusion. That's the first thing to encourage you to do. Do make a conclusion. Don't leave us hanging. We're not doing like an air high five that we're like, this is a bit awkward. Make sure that you give us an answer. As I say, if you've got a topic that's very black and white, you may want to summarize the main points. You might want to emphasize the main points. But equally, if you've got a topic that there isn't necessarily a clear way or the other, you can say that. You can say something along the lines of, despite wide research, the question of cat's leg number is still questionable and is still debated. You don't have to necessarily give it summing up, but what you do need to do is provide us with a conclusion. And as I said before, make sure that you're returning to your original points and you're summarizing those original points. Don't be tempted to introduce new information. Okay, so other kind of things to think about, and what I'll do is we can do this in the chat after this point, but it's also to think about whether you have anything else that you have learned in the past, because one of the things that's really helpful at this stage is to share good practice, and certainly I would encourage you guys to, I know you've got your Facebook group, and hopefully that's working well, hopefully you're all getting to know each other, but one thing that's really nice is actually to use things like that and use Teams as an opportunity to share things that you're finding helpful. So, it might be that one of you has found a really good website that's giving different writing styles, or maybe somebody has found some really good sources that go through how to write in an academic writing style, for example. So do have a think about it. Do get in the habit of sharing areas of good practice. Just to say, do be careful with it. Obviously, you want to make sure the information is correct. So please don't assume everything you read is accurate. And if at any point you read something and think, is this right, is this wrong? Come and check with the tutors, because actually it's much better for you to share things that are accurate. And we all do it. We all read stuff and go, oh, that must be true because I found it here. So if there's any doubt, come and speak to us. But generally, I would encourage you to, share resources. Doesn't mean you do the same piece of work. That's not what I'm saying. That is known as collusion, and that is a very different subject. But in terms of sharing resources, sharing techniques, it might be that some of you have got techniques on how to proofread. It might be that someone's found a really good source that helps with referencing. So think about that. In terms of general tips for us, I think the first thing is to think of an essay a bit like an argument. So you're trying to get as many different opinions as possible. It does feel a little bit like a debating situation. And again, think about trying to provide as much evidence as you can, because obviously we all come to points from different angles. So definitely multiple references is really good. So if you feel like you have a good point, try and think about it from lots of different angles. Often that will give credibility to your writing, and also it closes a lot of the potential for making assumptions or misinterpreting references. So like we've got here, kind of, you've got your point in the paragraph, so back up with this source, describe how this source says it, so forth and so forth. So that will add kind of weight to your conversation. The other thing is to think about open-ended questions. So try not to create questions within questions. Again, some of us like to do it. We quite like philosophical questions. I have seen students use in the past rhetorical questions really effectively, but to be quite honest, that in itself is a skill. So I would avoid overusing rhetorical questions, and so just make sure you're clear in the arguments you're making. Also make sure you answer the questions that are asked of you. And this feels a little bit like I'm teaching you to suck eggs, but again, it's, we can often I do it as well, often get overexcited about the topic, and you go down this whole rabbit warren of, oh, it's this and this and this and this, and then you realise that actually you haven't actually answered the question. So make sure you go through the assignment brief really carefully, go through the key points. Again, when we launch the assignment on Monday, we will go through the main things, make sure everyone's happy. Another thing, don't go on a rant. This is not your opportunity to be on a soapbox. Of course, we would love to talk with you about particular issues. But remember, your aim in an essay is to be balanced, and to try and give lots of different sides and lots of different perspectives. If you find like you are getting into a little bit hot-headed, and a good way to do this, to tell if you're doing this, is by your posture when you're typing. I know if I am in the process of writing a very strongly worded essay, I get very tense and I kind of tap at the thing. So you should be able to pick up on it in yourselves. But again, if you're unclear, get people to proofread. Again, there's no reason why you can't, as a group, get each other to peer review. That's absolutely fine, but just be a little bit careful. As I say, at this stage of your education, you're expected to be critical, and you're expected to be objective. So if at any point you feel like you are going off on a tangent or you're getting emotional about something, just pull it in ever so slightly. Doesn't mean you can't give opinion, but just be careful with it. Okay, so just as I say, it's just designed to give you a really brief introduction to essay and report writing. We will come back to this in group tutorial, obviously when we're all together. As I say, I will launch your first essay on Monday, so please don't panic over the weekend about it. But it's designed to give you the opportunity to practice these things. And the reason why we're doing it now is because it just helps. It will mean that you have the opportunity to do it before term starts, really. That was only our process. As I say, it's a unique essay in that you submit it and get feedback, and then resubmit it and get more feedback. So please don't panic about it. See it as a training opportunity, or as a kind of a chance to try before you're assessed formally. But often it can be really encouraging, because actually students, particularly students who feel that they're maybe not fully prepared for university, it can often give us a good jump up. So yeah, have some fun with it. Just before I forget, before I log off, firstly, does anyone have any questions? Anything that we've talked about so far? Have we got any questions about it? No? Okay, cool, that's good. So other couple of things just to mention before I forget. So firstly, I've put a couple of resources up on Ledge today, not on Ledge yet, on Teams. Ignore I said Ledge, we'll talk about that another day. That you would have found on Teams, is I've popped up a video for you to watch, which is your formal introduction to the University Centre. So we have a number of people talking on that. For the essay, where would be the best resources. We'll come on to that tomorrow, Elsa, because what we're going to do is go through how to find references. So we'll do that. But basically the answer is through the library resources, but we'll come back to that tomorrow. I've got a few kind of tips and hints for you, so we'll do that. That's fine, don't worry, absolutely not a problem. So a couple of things just to make you aware of. So I've put a couple of posts on the main general Teams page. So the first, this is, you have got a video to watch. There is a formal introduction to the University Centre. So we have the principal, Julie Milburn, our Dean of Higher Education, who's Caroline James, the head of Higher Education, Matthew Norris Hill. So they are all talking to you, introducing themselves, giving you a little bit of information about the University Centre Sparshot, what's the expectations, those kind of things. But you've also got a video on there. So you've also got, as part of that video, an introduction from Kimmy Lewis, who, if you remember, I introduced you to briefly on Monday's lecture. So she is involved in our wellbeing team. So again, really helpful face to get to know. And it's worth just to say with wellbeing, like we are particularly interested in your well-being. It sounds really silly because obviously you would assume that everyone would be interested in well-being, but you know, we as a university are really interested. So if there is anything that historically you have struggled with, or anything that you want to share with me confidentially, please do drop me an email. Equally, you don't have to tell me. So if there's things that you think, this is a trigger, or I've struggled with this in the past, and you want some support, the wellbeing team is completely confidential. I don't have to know about it. So if you want to speak to them to get some support already, or whether there's things that you think right now I'm fine, but maybe in a few weeks I need support on, do make contact with them. They are incredible, really, really friendly. And again, there's so many different resources available, lots of different things they can help with and do. And as I say, I don't need to know as an academic tutor. Equally, if you do want to share with me anything, feel free to drop me an email, or if it's easier to talk, we can always have tutorials. That's not a problem. So that's on there as well. The other video that I've uploaded is the DSA team, so our higher education learning support team. Just to reiterate, I know I said it a little bit in our talk the other day, but just to reiterate the importance of making sure that you, again, let us know if there are any learning support needs required for you. I know that when you move to university, it can feel like a new start, and some people are ashamed of things that have happened before. But I would really encourage you, if you are in a position where previously you've had support for dyslexia or dyspraxia, whether you've had extra time in exams, do come and let me know, because actually, again, we can be as discreet as you need us to be, but I wouldn't want you to not come and get support because you feel embarrassed by it. I'm personally dyslexic. It's one of those things. So as I say, if you have got anything in place, have a look at the video, the second video. The 2 learning support members of staff are on there. We have HE specific learner support, so their contact details are on there as well. So do make contact with them as well if you need to. And I'd encourage you to do it sooner rather than later, because if we feel that we need to do an assessment with you, that does take a little bit of time. And whilst exams are in May, exams are in May. Obviously, we're already in October, so time does fly. So what we want you to have is the support from the start. I know some of you have already declared things. That's great. So if you've already declared stuff, you don't need to do it again. But if there's a few of you sat on the fringe, you think, oh, should I say something? To be honest, I would just say it, and then they can tell you if you're entitled to anything. So plan for tomorrow then, you'll see me again. So I'm going to do it at 3:30. At the moment, that's just how it fits in my teaching. So I realise some people are working, and I'm sorry about that. But hopefully you are accessing all the resources. So tomorrow we're going to spend a bit of time talking about the use of resources, how we access them, and I will show you some of the library bits as well, and we'll also have a brief discussion about plagiarism, although we can always come back to that next week if we need to. And then next week you've got more of a structured kind of lesson timetable. So you've got Sarah on Monday and Denise on Wednesday. So we're following the same pattern of Monday, Wednesday, Thursday, because that's your timetable days. And I'm hoping next week to be able to share with you a bit more specific information about the start of the course, so that in the next few weeks you're feeling fully prepared and fully ready. I personally am really, really excited to meet you. Obviously, this is, as I said in my previous talk, we fully planned for you guys to start a little bit later than other students, but I do appreciate that it's a little bit strange, especially as most people, go to university start of October, but I'm really excited to meet you all, so hopefully you're as excited as we are. And as I say, if there's any questions, any problems in the meantime, do please contact me. Also, just to mention, I know a couple of us are still having problems with Teams. I am still chasing it, but unfortunately the IT team have said that it is quite a lengthy process, which I didn't appreciate. So if you are still struggling to access resource, as you have been already, just let me know. I've had a few people email me, which obviously not going to pick it up on this message, but equally, like you did on Monday, that was absolutely perfect. Anything where there's problems, anything you can't access, anything you can't find, just drop me an email. And I'll see if there's a different format. And as I say, I'll send the link out to Monday's YouTube video in the next few hours, so you've got that as well. All right, cool. So I'm going to log off. Does anyone have any final questions before I disappear? No? Okay, lovely. So I will log off and I will see you all tomorrow at 3:30. I hope you all have a lovely evening. It's still not raining, which is fabulous. So hopefully it'll stay that way. And I will see you all tomorrow. Okay, take care.